Okay, checking one, two, three. Okay. Welcome. And today we are talking about time, writing, and universal perspective. I should be angled up. So I'm working to get this video out. I've been working like 10 minutes on the angling, but it's fine. So now we're going to talk about time and its relation to writing and why this is beneficial for you to learn. So one of the biggest things we see as sort of like a 3D construct is our relationship with time as human beings is like one of the most integral relationships we have with our reality, because obviously our lifespan is coded within the time, the amount of years we live, as well as just how many things happen. And the events that we take in our lives are based in like this chronological order. But what if I told you that this very way of thinking is based in limitation, and that by learning how to be flexible with time, you can in fact speed up certain processes, specifically in the reality you're trying to create, as well as when you're just living your life. And the best way to learn about how to talk about this very concept is actually through writing. So, a good example, talk about a book, right? So, here's a book, right? This is a book. It's got many pages coming out, right? And a book is kind of like a timeline of a story. And obviously, when we read a book from cover to cover, right? But depending on the book, like if it's a dictionary or an encyclopedia, we don't read it from cover to cover. We read it based off of where we need to. We go to the very exact reference we need to. Believe it or not, this is also how you access your memories of the past, because you're thinking actually in terms of, oh, I have this reference of this one time with this one relationship. And so you go through and then you slice right through to that reference point. Now, the difficulty is because when we look at our lives, there's actually a narrative structure to the way our lives work. But if we're unable to look at our lives as a whole and understanding the full narrative, because when you read a book, right, you read it from cover to cover, beginning to end. And in order for it to make sense, like if I just picked up Harry Potter and started reading up page 203 of like the fifth book, and I had never read anything of anything else before that, it wouldn't make very much sense, right? But if I kept reading it from that place, I would then start filling in the cracks of this narrative. And it might be completely different from what the actual book series is about, right? Because I don't have any context. We see this actually in the way AI determines its own context when it learns certain subjects, because when it doesn't have full narrative breadth, it begins to hallucinate or to create just to fill in gaps of the narrative. We do that as well as in our own brains. This is actually where AI is closer to human beings than we think, because AI does in fact hallucinate, but so do human beings. When you think of a memory from the past, that memory is often influenced by the state of emotions you're currently occupying or whatever is going on. And so you're not actually referencing the past in an objective manner like you think you are. You're doing it based off of wherever point you are in the narrative. And the difficulty is that if you still see yourself as a character within a book, it's very hard to move any way but linearly through your own story. But when we have a more enlightened perspective, or the perspective of the observer, now instead of being a character in a story, we now become an author or an observer. Now, there's a bit of a difference between being the author of the story versus being an observer of the story. And you need to learn how to do both in order to gain mastery over your understanding of time and to gain a proper understanding. So, one of the things like I actually recommend when I'm teaching how to write a book is oftentimes I talk about just whenever you have a nice story idea, think about the scenes or the parts that are the most concrete. And the idea is most of the time people want to write chronologically. That's how most people write. But rather than telling the story from like page chapter 1 all the way to chapter 25 or whenever the book ends, you can write chapter 17 or then chapter 18 or chapter 3, but not know where it fits in. You can just simply write a scene. And what's interesting is that we see that when we take a singular point in sort of the quantum field, that is our story idea, and we create a particular scene and we write it out, what happens is that particular point now begins to attract gravity from all the other potentials around it. And so now the story begins to formulate and become something coherent. So we see that also just like in writing a story. If I just begin to write scenes and I begin to put something down on paper, now I'm going to start creating something that has actual substance to it. And little by little, that's going to start being organized into a coherent narrative because I have the ability to hallucinate or to create something in between. And this is actually what we're going to use to our advantage when we start learning how to write a book. And this is also a really good habit to have when you think about how am I going to create the result of something in my life. Like if I want a girlfriend or if I want to make, so much money or whatever. Sometimes you have what you need to do is first start from the point that you see clearly, which is the actualized reality. And then from that point of actualized reality, even though you're not living in it, because remember, actualized reality is based in 3 planes of existence, right? And you can always start on the highest plane, which is this plane of sort of the spirit mind, and then move it down to the intellectual mind. And then remembering that the physical is a space of effect, it'll eventually drop down in terms of its creation. And so we see that by actualizing a point in reality, by observing it, we create potential. Now, if you guys don't know, this is about the observer effect, where there was the scientist that did the double slit experiment. You should look it up, where basically they saw that an observed electron would take on an actualized point in space and become a particle, but when it was unobserved and just left to its own devices, it would move like a wave, which was an unactualized point of potential. And so we see that by observing certain points quantumly, we're able to create reality. And that's also how a book comes to be. And so this is where learning how to write a book can actually help you understand how to better interface with your reality, with your memories, with your understanding of how the world works. Because when you learn to write, you learn that I can write a chapter, I can write a character, I can write something that doesn't necessarily need to make sense. But from working on one singular point and then actualizing another, eventually points of data will begin to actualize and become real. And then that wave potential, because you, like an AI, have the tendency to hallucinate, you will fill in the blanks. And in the filling blanks, that's your story, right? And that's actually also how we create in real life. This is why we have to learn how to let go of the how and simply focus on the actualized reality we want to see. So say, for instance, it's like I want to have a book deal. It's worth millions of dollars or whatever. And if you try to make a plan for how that can happen, you're trying to actualize something, like trying to plot out a book or a plot. But when you go and write it, it'll go off the rails. It'll kind of take on a life of its own, and it won't follow necessarily the plan you had because, the universe has different plans. And oftentimes that's because we need to learn how to surrender and how a relaxation of control gives us power. And so when we learn to do this, we then see that we compress time and that this scene that you really, really want to look after, you can actually visualize it and experience it in your head. And then, of course, in the story, when it's read from the character's perspective, from the reader's perspective, it happens later. But when you're able to experience it as an author and observer, you are able to fully have the experience internalized, and it becomes an actualized reality that you just have to see play out in the timeline of your life. And so for those who know, hopefully this makes sense. For those who don't, I guess stay confused, put questions down in the comments. If you want to learn more about how to do this, or you just want to learn how to write a book and learn how to apply these principles of life mechanics through the understanding of writing a book, check out this Hero Writer course down in my school group below. Like and subscribe, and essentially hold on to the idea that time is based in universal perspective, and that just like a book, you can go to a singular page, single point in time without the narrative, and you can experience a singular scene or point in reference without the time lag. And that if you simply actualize and you focus and observe that point in time, everything else will catch up. And that's actually how we speed up the buffer of time. So hopefully this makes sense. If it didn't, like, comment, subscribe down below. Hope you stay happy, stay healthy, and remember, keep writing. Peace.